Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us for another session of Exploration Tech. I'm really excited about our guest today, someone that we've had the pleasure of connecting with a few years ago, and watching his process and his work has just been very inspiring for us, so much so that we decided to work with him. As always, my name is Jared Hackbart. I'm the Director of Sales and Marketing here at Brilliance. I've been at Brilliance for almost 4.5 years, and as always, I'll keep my intro short because the next two are way more interesting than myself. So, Lori, please introduce yourself.
Yes. Hello, I'm Lori McDonald. I started Brilliance a little more than 20 years ago. I went to Purdue in computer electrical engineering, and through an internship, I ended up at NASA Johnson Space Center, which is what most people remember about me, that I worked as a flight controller for the space shuttle program, which was a lot of fun. I ended up meeting my husband there. He also went to Purdue in engineering, also worked as a flight controller at NASA, and he eventually went to work for Rockwell Automation. He had a promotion that brought us to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and so I ended up in Milwaukee trying to figure out what could be as cool as space, and that was in 1998, and the web was in its infancy, and I decided to start a web development company. And between my husband's experiences at Rockwell, where he managed their largest data warehouse, and my experience, my technical background, we found we were a really good fit for working, helping manufacturers and distributors implement digital commerce solutions. And that's the niche that we've created. And we've grown quite a bit as an organization. This year, we made the Inc. 5000 list. And I'm really excited about the conversation that we're going to have today, because, you know, from the beginning, my background and focus was solving technical problems, and yet the part that I wasn't my area of strength as an organization is like the creative and brand strategy side of it. That wasn't my background, and so I'm so excited. We've had the opportunity to work with Corrie, who's our guest today, on a number of occasions with clients and with Brilliance ourselves, and just I love his insight into what it really means to tell a good story. So John, I'd love for you to introduce yourself.
Thank you. That's a hard one to follow, but my name is John Corrie. I'm a brand storyteller. Where you solve technical problems, Laurie, I solve human problems. I solve brand problems. I have worked with brands for almost 30 years now. Had a very strong career in advertising before moving from a design-based background into more communication and strategy. And over the last 5 to 6 years, have focused purely on telling brand stories, solving brand problems, going into a brand at a strategic level, helping them ask questions to themselves, have a good look in the mirror, work out what it is that they need to say, solving problems internally at a grassroots level with internal communications, being 95% of what I do. A lot of the stuff I do does not go consumer facing. So I find that, you know, the juiciest parts of the stories are the ones that brands are telling within themselves, that's telling themselves before they speak to a consumer. And so I've found that there's been an amazing amount of work and wonderful clients to collaborate with since starting this focus on brand storytelling, and that's what I do.
John, you know, when I used to come to you for opportunity and saying, hey, I got a project I think would be good, I'm looking for someone to do some graphic design, you know, and you'd always come back and say, well, it's not graphic design. Are they looking for brand storytelling? And, you know, I've always had this maybe confused idea of what that is. Can you share with us what is brand storytelling, why it's important?
Yeah, I mean, storytelling itself, I find that has been, it's definitely a buzzword. It's an exciting word that people use a lot nowadays. When I was starting to use it a while ago, it wasn't as popular, but it's definitely not a phrase that I coined myself. Brand storytelling is essentially what we've learned as human beings and what we've translated from being human and telling stories to each other into a brand environment. So people will also ask me, I mean, it's a great title to introduce yourself as because it gets attention. But people often ask me what the difference is between a brand storyteller and a copywriter. And my answer to that is most normally, unless you know what it is you're trying to say as a brand, as a story, and unless you know what your values are, your beliefs are, and all of these, you know, juicy topics, unless you can define those first, you cannot necessarily brief a copywriter to say, here's what we need written. Copywriters and copywriting is an incredible talent and a great skill, but it comes second to knowing what story you're telling. And that sometimes brands know what it is what they need to say, and they might be doing a slight pivot from talking to one consumer to another. It might be a startup who's just trying to find their feet and put words to the values and the beliefs that they have so they can reach consumers. But in this infancy stage, or no matter what stage you engage a brand, they're going to need to ask themselves, who are we? What do we stand for? What are we trying to say? And why should people care? And this why should people care, I think, is one of the biggest questions that I ask clients all the time. And when they can answer that, and when we can get to really to the sticky center of these sweet brands, then we can say, now we know what it is you want to communicate. We've defined what the story is. Now we can put words to that. And that's where the writing comes in. That's where imagery comes in, photography comes in, that's where design comes in. You can then use all of these wonderful tools that you have in your toolbox as a designer, as a communicator, but you cannot really do any of that unless you know what it is you're trying to say. If you do, then generally what you're doing is you're putting a picture somewhere and writing some words, and you're trying to make things look pretty, almost as a distraction to the fact that you don't know what it is that the core of your message is. And sometimes a brand will come to me at that point and say, we're a little bit lost and we need to help to find our way. And other times they say, look, we've made a fantastic, really strong start, but as brands need to do, as people do, they need to grow with their messaging and grow with their consumers. And they say, well, this is our first step. Can you help us find the next one and the next one? So storytelling in its essence, as it runs through brands, is an ongoing, very exciting, very visceral, very human thing to do.
I love it. In many ways, you're like a coach. I mean, you're helping people like gain clarity on the story that the story that they have, right? And the story that people are going to care about and connect with them. When is the right time to engage in brand storytelling? Is there a moment that you know this is what you need to do, or because you've got some project internally, or when is it the right time?
Yeah, it's a great question. It can be motivated by an actual project or some sort of activation that needs to be done. And that's when a brand can look and say, well, we need some support with communication that could come in the form of copywriting or storytelling to help bring words to the message or the purpose of what we have. And they might have defined that already, and it may just be that we need to put a story with it. But I don't know whether there's necessarily any right time to engage in storytelling. It's more about the journey that the brand is on. And as I've said before, it could be that a brand is already well established and just needs to sort of, write their path. They might be drifting a little bit, or using some generic messaging, or finding that they're, just not coming out of the pack as clearly as they want to, starting to sound like everybody else, and they need to find a new voice. Or it could be at the very beginning of a process where you're saying to a brand is coming to you and saying, can you help us literally, communicate for the first time to our consumer and introduce us? To come back to a question, when is it a good time to engage with this sort of a service? And I just feel like that any time you feel like you're sort of drifting off the road or losing your way, or need to regain your focus, or make sure that you're reaching the person you want to reach, even if that means you've changed your direction a little bit, we're speaking to this sort of, target market, now we want to speak to that one, then that's when you need to do it. It's making sure that you're always on the path of staying true to whatever your message is. This year for 2020 has been an incredible year for everybody. I think it's like the snow globe got a really hard shake, and as all the priorities of our life start falling down like little flakes, we've been asking ourselves what's important in our life, what is it that we want to do, what is that we need, what don't we need. That's as human beings. I find that everything that we learn as human beings gets translated one-to-one into business. So to take a step back, when I think of storytelling, I think of storytelling in the essence of, as I've grown up, listening to great stories my whole life. This is the way we communicate who we are. It's how we make friendships. It's how we build relationships in business. It's how I say to you, look, these are the things that I believe, and then you say back to me, oh, I believe in the same things. And out of that, a relationship is formed. And as we do that, we build on our stories, and more experiences gather, and we snowball up, and then we become the people that we are. And the same goes for business. And so it's not necessarily that people's offerings have changed through 2020. I don't think people have changed their products or changed their services. Businesses are still who they are. But as the consumers have looked at their lives and said, I need to now, check my priorities and ask myself what's important. And as a result, may have stopped buying certain products, may have stopped engaging in some services and cut off some, some subscriptions somewhere and changed the way they spend their money. I think brands have had to look at that and say, okay, we still have the same services, we still have the same offerings in a lot of cases. How can we talk to our consumers now so they still remain engaged in what we do and what we have? That has been an interesting process for a lot of brands that I've worked with. And mostly I find that the greatest currency that brands have had through this process is honesty and transparency. And you'll find through this entire conversation, I will just reference a whole lot of human qualities and values. And this is really, for me, what it's all about. If a brand can be honest and be transparent with their consumer, then they will maintain a relationship with them, even through hard times. And 2020 has shown us anything. It's been a really rough ride for a lot of people. And brands have really had to just shift this conversation and the narrative from the way they have been confidently speaking beforehand to a lot more empathetic and transparent way of communicating to let people know that they also have been going through these things. And the reason they have been is because all brands are made up of human beings. They go through the same experiences in the end. So people are just trying to communicate with each other just to say, I know what you're going through, and somehow maintain that connection.
I feel like 90% of the branding right now that we're seeing is, we are in this with you. You know, everyone is using that same standard story. You know, I feel like every major brand you've seen use that very similar storyline. Seems like it's time to get more creative.
Yeah, in a way, yes. And I think creativity at this point is important, but I still would maintain my course as my advice to any brands is to hold your course in some sort of place of making sure that your story is authentic. And I believe that in the beginning, when pandemic hit and a lot of brands were being affected and people all over the world were being affected, the communication was, we're in this with you, we're here with you, we're going through the same thing as you. And that was all I believe in the beginning, and still is incredibly genuine for the most part. But like you say, even when the message is really genuine and said from the heart, it can still somehow become extremely generic, and all of a sudden you're just bombarded with a whole lot of we're in this with you, and then consumers saying, I can't see it. And that's where I think the focus for a brand needs to be. It's not just about saying we're in this with you and we understand. It's that brand has to take that extra step and convert that talk into action and say, not only can I say to you, I understand, but I'm going to communicate that by doing these actions, or I'm going to take these steps to help you. Or even if it's a step back, I also find as long as it's an honest story that a brand is telling, they might even need to say, we need to step back from what we would normally do for you, but it's going to be temporary because we need to make sure we care for ourselves so eventually we can serve you the best way we can. And as long as brands are being honest and open in that narrative, and it's a conversation between a consumer and a brand, and that's, I think, also really important for people to remember that, you know, brands, although there's a big logo on top and people think, well, I'm just talking to that brand, that logo, underneath that can be a team of 10 in a startup or a team of thousands in a global corporation. People, real people coming into work with their real problems, with their, you know, their sickness and health, and they're coming in with their egos and arrogance and their responsibilities and their talents and their creativity and their fantastic personalities and everything. I mean, this is all these little moving individual people. They come in and they bring their talents to work together in a brand to bring focus to something, to essentially then bring a message to people. And that's the thing that people see. They see the final output. They see this final tagline. They see a billboard. They see you know, some social media campaign. They see something like that. Behind that is an incredible amount of work by a lot of people who are just still trying to maintain a connection with people. And that's what I find is really fascinating about brand storytelling, or storytelling in any sense, is that it doesn't shift the focus. The focus will and always has been, I am trying to communicate with you so I can build a relationship with you and make a connection. And if I can do that as a brand, even through the hardest of times, I can be transparent with you and honest with you and keep that conversation open. I can always come back to that. And I think consumers are way smarter than they used to be. They're not looking to be sold the big generic message. They're also not, they don't want to see the traditional sense of beauty. They don't want to see, they want to understand diversity and inclusion. And it's a very, very volatile time at the moment, but also a very exciting time for change. And I think, if anything, it's really shaken up a lot of brands to say, we cannot always divert back to this generic sense of messaging where we've always fallen back off, because people have just had enough of it. They've had their stomachs full of it, and they really just want to know, can I trust this brand? Do I believe what they're saying? And if they can get that and make this connection with a brand, and a person and a consumer believes the brand, then that's where the relationship is. They'll go through hard times with the brand because of that. I speak from personal experience from that. I will buy a brand's products because I believe in what they do. I believe the story behind their story, and I believe that they really mean what they're saying.
Yeah.
And I will stay with the brand because of that, even through hard times.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that, John, and especially like I love your, you know, how you talk about authenticity, because stories don't hold up if they're not authentic. And if we can't, and to your point, like consumers are smart, people are smart. We've all been tripped up by people who told us a story that turned out not to be true. And so when you talk about being able to see how organizations are actually living that out and that being a part of the story, like it's just super compelling. Sometimes when I think about storytelling, I think about like telling a misleading story, like telling the story I want people to believe that may not be true, right? Like there's this aspect of like the storyteller that's like a swindler, right? And yet, like what you're talking about is like stories don't hold up if they're not like authentic. And if we can't, and to your point, like consumers are smart, people are smart. We've all been tripped up by people who told us a story that turned out not to be true. And so when you talk about being able to see how organizations are actually living that out and that being a part of the story, like it's just super compelling. So
I also find that it's been a very interesting time for telling stories that are incomplete, or they're imperfect stories. I also think this is a really beautiful narrative. And again, not to make a cliche out of it, but I believe that if a brand is really authentically telling a story and says, I don't have all of the solutions to what the problems are right now. I don't have the answers to what's happening in the world right now. I cannot do that. I don't have even all the answers to all the questions I have within my own business. But this is where I'm at. For example, there's 10 stages that I've mapped out, and I'm up to stage 3. If a brand wants to tell me that, I'll go with them. Because I say, as long as I believe in that product and I believe that brand to be authentic, to say, I'm on a journey just as you're on a journey, and I'm growing as a brand just as you're growing as a brand. And this happens at all different levels, like I said, from the smallest companies through to the biggest ones. They're all going through this experience of reinvention and learning and trying to stretch themselves and change the status quo, break through new boundaries, all of these things. And as human beings, we're all doing that anyway. So as long as they can tell me, they can tell me an incomplete story or an imperfect story and say, we're trying to, rid the world of plastic waste. We don't know how to do it yet, but this is the step we're up to, for example. We're making products using ways that does this, this, this. And by this date, in 2, 3 years, 5 years time, we hope to be here. And that to me is a compelling story. I don't want to be told by a brand anymore that they have all the answers to anything. I just want to know that be able to communicate with the brand the way that I would communicate with my friend. And I would expect the same thing from my friend. I would expect honesty and transparency. I would expect good advice when I need it. I'd expect guidance when I'm in trouble. And that's the sort of thing that I feel like I can bring to brands. It's just the humanness of storytelling. And although, I mean, of course, I understand when it comes to speaking to businesses, there's often measured by financial metrics. Of course, we have to make sure that products are sold, there's targets to hit, there's budgets to spend or to hold back on. I understand all of this. What I can speak from the experiences that I've had, especially since focusing on strategy and storytelling, is that the messages that are the most pure and the most honest will have the most cut through with the brand and with the consumer. And that will equate to success in whatever category it is that you're in. And I think that's just really important to be reminded of that.
So John, like you're talking about the need to like be honest in our communications. Like how can we be more honest with ourselves when we're working with people, so that they can really hear, like we can make that connection? Like what does that look like?
Yeah, I think good question. I think it looks like sort of in the way I was describing. I think it looks like finding the right language to communicate in the most honest way possible, and that will be different language for different brands. And so some will be able to be you know, more relaxed and casual, like you're speaking to a good friend, and that's the way they communicate with their brand language. And other ones will still need to maintain a certain level of professionalism, depending on what market and what sector you're in, or who you're talking to, of course. But I think it's always going to come down to knowing who I'm talking to, understanding what sort of language I need to use to get to that person, and just making sure that they understand why they should care. Why should they care about me as a brand? I'm imagining myself as a brand right now and saying, if I was engaging with anybody, I've got to tell that story. I've got to tell that story in a way that, why would they care? If I can work that out, then more often than not, the consumer will understand where I'm coming from, and hopefully still engage in services. And behind all of this, again, I would fall back on this idea of, it becomes a part of the people who work at the company, of course. Relationships, like for yourself, you'd understand the relationships you have with your clients would be ongoing and really strong, built on the personalities of the people within Brilliance and the time that you've invested in letting them understand who you are and to trust you and to come inside your brand and experience your brand with you, so that even through those times, they will say, we can count on Brilliance. And that is not necessarily because of a brand message. It might have been a brand message that engaged them or that brought them in. But once they're in, it really does rely quite a lot on the human interaction between people, so that they can say, you know, we believe in that brand because we also understand the people behind it. It won't always be that way. For example, you go out and buy a pair of shoes, you're not going to know the people behind the company. You're going to believe more in the brand messaging and try your best to understand what they stand for. And again, I think that's probably then where we get into the difference between B2C, B2B messaging, because at one point you're going to say, well, I'm directly talking to a consumer as if I am another person. And then the other one being, it's a business talking to a business.
We're going to have to convince John to join us for another session. There's just too much good content here tonight. And there's no way we're going to get through it all, but we're going to keep marching forward. So I'll stop.
All right.
Jibber jabbering here. A lot of times people, and I can speak from experience, they don't know what they're trying to achieve, and they don't know how to even start that process. Can you tell us your experience working with organizations that have that problem?
Yeah, I mean, that's an exciting part of the process for me. Like I say, a lot of my time has been spent behind the curtain inside brands. And yeah, I mean, it has nothing to do with the size of the company. I've worked with really small companies, helping them when they say, I don't know what we want, and helping them find that message or find that focus. But it might just require a really good conversation where everybody in the business or the key people have put all their thoughts on the table, and I just help to filter through it to say, here's where I think the right direction would be. But I mean, that's also happened with me with, you know, global companies where I've walked in and been invited into meetings with the sole purpose of just sitting in the room to listen. And I think because they say we don't exactly know what we want out of this meeting, we don't know what the output needs to be. We do know we have a lot of people with a lot of good ideas, but we just need you to sit in the room and listen to it. And then at the end, just tell us what you think. And that's why, you know, when it comes to understanding and helping brands find their way and navigate through these muddy waters of, you know, all of the other brands out there trying to say the same thing and say it as loud as they can and get as much attention as they can, I think it's been really interesting that the core skill that I can bring to this is listening. It's almost as if being quiet has become my USP. I go into brands, you know, not so much to lecture them or to sell to them, but sometimes just to listen to them so that I can help them find where it is that they need to go. And I find that really enjoyable because, I mean, it doesn't really bother me if I'm not writing copy that's going onto an international ad campaign. I'm not getting my value from that. I'm getting my value from going into brands and then helping them understand who they are, so then they can get the focus to go ahead and do whatever it is they need to do. We can just write a good brief together. Sometimes I've done that with a brand, help them write a brief that makes sense so they can engage with another agency, just so they can put their thoughts together. I've also helped brands put a presentation together that one team needs to present to another team, but they just needed help to put the idea together so it made sense so the other team would invest in it as well. So this is just, there's a whole world of communications that happens behind the curtain before consumers even get involved, that I find is really, really exciting. You're right, Jared, I'm going to talk way too much. Sorry, mate.
This is great. I love it.
No, it's all excellent. Are you kidding? No apologies.
Yeah.
I think that I would agree. As an organization at Brilliance, we are very process driven. Obviously, our engineering background is probably reflective of that. And we had actually met through a mutual client, and we're pretty tough when it comes to selecting new partners that we want to work with, because taking our processes so seriously. And you know, after meeting you and working with you, we saw you had a very similar approach in a sense, even though we were in two different worlds. So I'd love to have you share more about your process. I know you had started kind of leveraging or talking about the idea of listening, and that being your starting point.
I think for me, I can put I put my mission or my idea of how I approach every job into 4 words, which is less static, more clarity. This for me is my focus. If I can find my way through the noise and find the clarity of the message, then this to me is a successful project. So that can be, it might be that it's a really long piece of strategic work that needs to be written over a deck that might be 60 pages long, or it could be a really simple headline that's on a web banner that's going to engage someone on their homepage. It might be really simple, it might be really complex, but in the end, it's finding the clarity in the messaging for me is the big thing. So I follow 4 really, really simple steps. They're going to sound really simple when you think about them, because they are just human nature. First step, I listen. I listen to what the client has to say. I listen to all the people involved. I take in as much information as I can. I really want to absorb everything and just immerse myself into the world as much as I can. And the second step is understand it. And this for me can be complex depending on which client you're working with. It might be something that I have absolutely no experience in. And so I will be constantly asking questions. I don't understand. I don't know. Can you please explain that again? Can we please go through that again? Because if I don't understand what people have told me, there is no successful outcome. So it's the listening and the understanding. These are just what I feel are just, you know, values that we all understand as humans. And then from there, it's building the communication. So that, like I said, could manifest itself in the way of a campaign or a strategic deck or a social campaign, or all different types of vehicles, the different tools we have of communicating and telling stories. And then with that, we go to the goal of building the relationship with the client. So if we've done all of our homework and we've built a story that is really on target and focused and speaking to the people they need to speak to, then a relationship should be formed. And the idea that a client would come to you and be satisfied by your service or like your product or whatever it is, and you've lived up to that message that you've sold them and shared with them this story, then they will come back. And that's where meaningful relationships are formed. And clients and consumers will come back to the brands that they trust. They'll spend 20, 30 years investing in a brand that they like. They'll only wear a certain type of shoe or a certain type of t-shirt because that is the one that has never let them down. And that's what brands have to do. They have to build a message that is not just sounds reliable and sounds strong and sounds trustworthy. They have to deliver that with their service and their product. And after that, the cycle will continue.
I love what you've helped us do at Brilliance with our brand. And so, you know, we really enjoyed the process of working with you with our customers. And we realized that we needed some help in terms of the story that we were telling. And Jared, I think you're going to pull up our brand. And I'd love, Jared, for you to share a little bit about our experience working with John. But before you do, I just wanted to say that from my perspective, when we engaged on this, John, I think what was really interesting to me about this process was that the things that people often remember about Brilliance is like my story that I worked at NASA before coming to Brilliance, right? Like, I don't think of ourselves as like a traditional agency. We tend to be a little more nerdy and technical, like not as focused on some of the things that people would expect from a traditional creative agency. But the people who love us, our clients who love us, love the fact that we know how to solve their problems.
That's right.
And like we've solved those problems before, we can solve your problem, and they trust us. Like they know that we'll tell them the truth. And so like what you created for us just really encapsulates that so well. Like it weaves in the space piece. It brings out our nerdiness in a really fun way, and just really rings true to who we are. So yeah. That's my take on it. Jared, what's been your experience of working through this with John?
Yeah, you did such an excellent job describing it. I have a few things. No. You are the founder and owner. I think you have every right to describe our brand. But no, I will say, working with John, he references listening and his process, and while I love the design and everything that we all ended on, but this tagline that you see here in the front really, to me, was what hit home the most. And it seemed so simple, but it speaks to who we are as an organization. Lori referenced, we're not your typical agency, and that's one of the conversations that we have with John, is the fact that we're a pretty nerdy group, process driven, engineering backgrounds. 90% of our staff is developers and managers, and we don't have that creative piece of our business, and we tend to work with partners on that side. And this is why, because we wouldn't have come up with something that was so elegant and just very short and sweet and tells our story in a really fantastic way. We are definitely going to have to go ahead and convince Mr. Corrie to join us again for another session, because we got a lot of other great topics to cover on this, and I'd love to tell more about our experience working with John. If you are interested in connecting with John, you can either reach out to us, or John, is it right if I share your email?
Absolutely.
Yeah, you can reach John at johncorrie.com.au. He can share more about that as well with you and his background, but he's an outstanding individual, and we've really enjoyed our partnership with him to date. So John, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to join us. We really appreciated it.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. I've really enjoyed it too. Thank you both so much.
Have a great day, everyone.